Greetings, dear viewers. This is Moto Channel. In this video, I want to take a little break from motorcycles and move to the snowy expanses of the northern lands of America and Eurasia. And we will be looking at motorized vehicles designed to conquer these endless expanses. I invite you to talk a bit about snowmobiles. Heat up the kettle, make your favorite drink, and get comfortable. Let's get started. The appearance of motorized equipment designed to conquer snowy terrain, like any other technology in demand, was only a matter of time. And yes, nowadays, if we're even a little interested in vehicles, we have a pretty clear idea of what a snowmobile looks like. Wasn't always that way. The long history of these machines includes many interesting and unusual designs. At the beginning of the 20th century, the inventors of the first snowmobiles, trying to solve the problem of transporting people and goods on snowy roads, combined skis, a simple wooden frame, a primitive engine, and various types of propulsion into a single design, resulting in some very curious machines that were given different names. For example, sleds, motor sleds, aero sleds, motorized runners, toboggans, motor narts, and so on. The term snowmobile came into use later. For a long time, we called snowmobiles motornarts. Surprisingly, you can still come across this term today. In today's material, in addition to classic snowmobiles, we'll look at many other interesting designs for moving across snow. However, we'll only touch a little on the topic of aero sleds, because if you dig deep, you could talk about them alone for more than half an hour. And I believe that a thorough exploration of this topic deserves a separate discussion. If you're interested in hearing about aero sleds, please let me know in the comments. The topic of tracked and half-tracked vehicles with wheels in the front and a tracked module in the back will also only be touched on briefly, since these are primarily all-terrain vehicles. The birth date of the first snowmobile in history, or more precisely, the aero sled, can be considered the winter of 1903-1904. Russian engineer Sergei Nezhdanovsky invented them under Nikolai Zhukovsky's supervision. During the test, Nezhdanovsky noticed that the speed of the experimental mechanism varied greatly depending on the condition of the snow, air temperature, and other external factors. After sharing his observations with Zhukovsky, he began studying how runners slide over snow. As a result, a number of formulas were derived to determine how the resistance to movement over snow depends on the load and the position of the center of gravity. These conclusions made it possible to determine the optimal dimensions and parameters of the supporting skis, and the data obtained soon found wide application in the design of aero sleds. In the early 1910s, aero sleds were no longer a novelty not only in Russia, but also in the snowy regions of Austria, France, and Germany. Their peak development was in the 1920s and 1930s. Though few in number, this equipment took part in many expeditions and combat operations. For example, about 36 aero sleds armed with machine guns were used in the defense of Moscow during the Great Patriotic War. After World War II, many already considered aero sleds a thing of the past. The Canadian Joseph Armand Bombardier had already been producing his snowmobile for a couple of decades, which was cheaper, more economical, and surpassed aero sleds in every way. However, aero sleds are still being made today, both by individual enthusiasts and in series at factories. But their boom has long since passed. We will talk about them in detail in a separate segment. Now, let's move on to skis and tracks. In 1901, the American engineer Elvin Lombard built a 20-ton logging transporter. The tracked tractor was powered by a steam engine, and skis were attached at the front for steering the machine. It's hard to call Lombard's locomotive a snowmobile, but this contraption was quite successful at hauling logs both in winter and summer. Lombard's locomotives were never produced in large numbers. A total of 81 such machines were built between 1904 and 1914. Actually, Lombard had other inventions that made him a millionaire, and the logging vehicles were just a niche product. They were mainly used in his home state of Maine and in Wisconsin. It is also mentioned that they were in Russia as well. If necessary, the skis were replaced with wheels, but this happened during the times of the year when the roads had a hard surface. At the dawn of all this movement, in 1905, motor sleds called American Motor Sleigh were released in the United States. In fact, these were classic sleds on runners. Only at the front, a 4-horsepower air-cooled gasoline engine was installed, and the propulsion was provided by 3 spring-loaded pushing legs on the crankshaft under the passenger seat. This marvel could accelerate up to 24 kilometers per hour. In 1910, the English polar explorer Robert Scott began his Terra Nova expedition to Antarctica. After wintering in 1911, the expedition reached the South Pole on January 17, 1912. But at the pole, they were met with unpleasant news. There, they found a Norwegian flag and a tent. This meant that they had been beaten by the expedition led by Roald Amundsen, which reached the pole on December 17, 1911. For his expedition, Scott decided to use almost all the technological advancements available at the time: radio communication, telephone, and probably the world's first motor sledges. While Scott's tragic expedition is well known, it's surprisingly hard to find details about the motor sledges. It's worth noting that in 1907-1909, another English Antarctic explorer, Ernest Shackleton, used a motor tractor with skis and wheels, and later consulted Scott. It is known that the sledges were built in 1909 according to Major Hamilton's design at the Wolseley Company, with a total of 6 units produced. Since the spring of 1909, the motor sledges were tested in Switzerland and Norway. Despite the fact that they performed poorly, the engine kept breaking down, their own weight was high, and regardless of Shackleton's feedback about the actual use of the equipment, Scott took 3 motor sledges on the expedition. The motor sledges were built with a 4-cylinder, air-cooled engine from the Advance Motor Manufacturing Company, with a size of 80 by 80 millimeters and a displacement of 1.6 liters. Technically, the task was to build a machine that could travel 300 miles with a 1-ton trailer. 3 more motor sledges were ordered by the German expedition to Antarctica. However, they were not used. The tracked propulsion system was a frame with wheels at the edges and a suspension made of leaf springs, evenly distributed inside the frame. In theory, the minimal number of rubbing and rotating parts was supposed to ensure the reliability of the propulsion system. In 1910-3, new machines were shipped for Scott's expedition to New Zealand. The motor sleds in the expedition quickly performed poorly. It all started when, during unloading, one of the 3 motor sleds sank. The group on the motor sleds set off on October 24, 1911, and was supposed to deliver 3 tons of supplies to the base at 80 degrees, 30 minutes south latitude. The sleds moved at 0.8 kilometers per hour and broke down constantly. The first of the 2 sleds broke down on November 1, and the second failed after another 87 kilometers. Despite the Antarctic cold, the air-cooled engines were overheating, the transmission was working poorly, and the lubrication system was designed for minus 40 degrees. In reality, they had to work at even lower temperatures. After that, the people were forced to harness themselves to the sled and pull it for 241 kilometers to the designated place. each person carrying a load of 200 kilograms. As a result, for 3/4 of the journey, the people carried all the equipment themselves. Sergei Nezhdanovsky. Yes, the very same inventor of the world's first aerosleds did not stop his developments. And in 1916, according to some sources in 1914, he built a motor sled with an original ski chain drive, which was later named after him. The idea was that instead of a caterpillar track, lightweight openwork chains were used, with links shaped like rectangular frames, and support skis were installed above the lower branch of the tracks. As the ski moved, snow passed through the chain links, was compacted against the ski, and the ski rode onto and glided over the chains being laid out ahead. Because the entire weight of the snowmobile was supported by the skis installed inside the two tracks, the specific pressure on the snow was only 54 grams per square centimeter. The results exceeded all expectations. With a weight of 265 kilograms and an engine power of only 1.5 horsepower, the speed over loose snow was 12 kilometers per hour. What was most surprising was that the sled glided over the surface without sinking, even though the snowdrifts were more than half a meter deep. In 1916, after another round of tests, the Inventions Department of the Moscow Military Industrial Committee issued a conclusion. The only motor sleds that moved quite well over completely loose snow were the sleds of Sergei Nezhdanovsky. The author was awarded a prize, and the Ministry of Trade issued him a certificate. Frenchman Adolphe Caigres played a key role in developing snowmobile and automobile technology. He led the technical department of the Imperial Garage in Tsarskoye Selo and was briefly Nicholas II's personal chauffeur. And so, in 1908, trying to adapt the automobile to Russian off-road conditions, he replaced the drive wheels with a track device which became known as the Caigres device. Skis were attached to the front wheels. The Caigres system's propulsion design consisted of drive and guide drums, a continuous belt, and support rollers that transferred the vehicle's weight through the belt onto the snow. At first, the tracks were made from rawhide and fishing nets, then from thick camel felt, and later from rubber. The torque was transmitted to the track belt by the friction of its lugs against the drive drums, which was one of the weak points of the design. Caigres's devices were first used as attachments for cars and motorcycles. One car made a trip from Petersburg to Mogilev. The First World War prompted improvements in the propulsion system. In 1916, the Pudilov plant made 30 Caigres propulsion systems for armored and cargo vehicles at the front, and the total order called for 300 sets. But after the 1917 revolution, Caigres thought it best to return to France. His invention was installed on various vehicles, including Vladimir Ilyich Lenin's Rolls-Royce. The car is now in a museum in Gorky, near Moscow. The idea of Caigres's propulsion system was also used on motor sleds. However, it soon became clear that for reliable track drive, engagement was needed rather than friction. In his homeland, Adolf was hired by the Citroën Automobile Company, which later bought Caigres's patent for his tracked propulsion system and actively used it in their own developments. For example, several Citroën cars equipped with Caigres tracks on their chassis made road trips across several Asian countries, to the Himalayas and to Africa. These expeditions were called the Yellow and Black Raids, and to this day, such tracks are called Caigres tracks, which is a kind of tribute to the inventor. Meanwhile, in snowmobiles, truly original solutions sometimes emerged. So in the first decade of the 20th century, Nikolai Karabanov built a snowmobile walker in which the engine rotated a crankshaft on which a pair of connecting rods spun, and thanks to them, the sled pushed off from the ground. Sadly, this machine could only move on ice. Although by the end of the 1920s, people were already traveling on snow not only by horse, there was still a need for simple, lightweight, and inexpensive motor sleds. The young Soviet government aimed to solve the winter problem. And in 1925 to 1929, tests of various designs were conducted in the vicinity of Moscow for the needs of the workers' and peasants' Red Army. 36 snowmobiles were used to travel on snowy roads and untouched snow for distances of up to 300 kilometers. The tests were supervised by former Tsarist Army Colonel Alexander Kryzhevsky. The idea of upgrading the motorcycle, as we would say today, seemed tempting. To install what they called stability skis and improve the rear wheel's grip on the surface. And while the first part was quite simple, making the wheel push the vehicle forward even somewhat effectively, just couldn't be achieved. Motorcycles with special modules perform much better. Kupryanov's track drive was tested on an Indian motorcycle and Prokhorovchik's on a Harley Davidson. The Soviet Union lacked a motorcycle industry then, so they experimented with imported equipment. The modules were unreliable, so the idea wasn't developed further. A similar fate awaited the tracked module developed for the L8 motorcycle. In these photographs, you can see a Harley Davidson motorcycle for which the Kharkiv Automobile Assembly Plant developed and manufactured Brilling's quick-release device, which was intended to improve the motorcycle's ability to travel through snow. During tests in 1931, it turned out that on a packed road, the motorcycle without the track moved briskly at a speed of 35 kilometers per hour. With the track installed, it managed 15. On virgin snow 200 millimeters deep, the motorcycle's speed fell to 5 km/h and it struggled on slopes. There were also difficulties with steering. The module itself turned out to be too heavy for one person to install. During the tests, it turned out that the design was very raw, its parts were breaking, the track kept coming off, and so on. Consequently, the military lost interest and the development faded into oblivion. Similar creations existed in both Europe and across the ocean. In this photo, for example, a Harley Davidson is modified with skis and wheel chains for snow riding. In this part of the story, I want to tell you about one of the great innovators in the field of snowmobiles. His name is Carl Eliasson. As early as 1921, Carl became passionate about the idea of building snowmobile equipment. You know, nothing appears out of nowhere. Most often, the basis of an invention is a simple human need to get rid of some inconvenience or to make one's work easier. Eliasson was an avid hunter, but his limp made it very difficult for him to hunt in the snowy forest during winter. The hunter created a helper for himself. As early as 1924, Eliasson was testing his first working prototype in the woods around Sainer, Wisconsin. The Saina, that was the name of the machine, had a front-mounted engine with 2.5 horsepower and liquid cooling, a tracked drive, steering skis with cable control, and a 2-seat bench located above the track. A quarter of a Ford Model T radiator was mounted in the front to cool the suspended engine. The snowmobile worked as follows. The track could be raised and lowered. The engine was started with the track raised and spun it up to operating speed. Lowering it onto the snow set the vehicle in motion, and the amount of slippage determined the speed of the vehicle. Carl patented his original machine in 1927. Continuous development and improvement over 15 years of Saina's production led to the creation of larger motor toboggan models. About 40 Saina snowmobiles were built in total, and none of them were exactly the same. Improvements through trial and error were important for success, but the track and suspension concept remained the same on all units. As the snowmobiles grew in size to 3- and 4-seaters, 2- and 4-cylinder motorcycle engines were used as the power plant. The 2-cylinder model cost $350, while the 4-cylinder one was $550. Marketing was aimed at hunters, various professionals, doctors, mail carriers, and so on, and outdoor enthusiasts. Gradually, the Eliasson motor toboggan became known all over the world. Eliasson models from the 1930s were equipped with a 2-cylinder Excelsior engine with 12 horsepower, while later models had an Indian 45 engine with 25 horsepower. Since the production of toboggans was limited to 8 or 9 units per year, such small output could not meet the military's demands during the World War II. Carl began searching for partners, and Finland's offer to purchase 200 units helped convince the four-wheel drive auto company from Clintonville to take on the production of Eliasson snowmobiles, and Carl acted as the chief consultant. The FWD company slightly modified the latest prototype and updated all related patents. Work started to boil. Although the deal with Finland fell through, the United States Army later purchased 150 completely white Eliasson FWD motor toboggans for use in the defense of Alaska. Interesting fact, Soviet representatives visited the FWD factory and tested the toboggan by riding up and down the Pigeon River. The Indian 45 engine with a 3-speed gearbox allowed the snowmobiles to reach speeds of up to 55 kilometers per hour. By the end of the war, production had decreased, and the main consumers became government conservation departments, gamekeepers, and hunters. The total production volume in Clintonville from 1941 to 1947 was about 300 units. With the increase in FWD truck sales and the decline of interest in the motor toboggan, in 1947 the Canadian subsidiary of FWD in Kitchener, Ontario, entered the scene. The production of the Model D snowmobiles was transferred here. It was here that the revolutionary K-Series model Kitchener was developed. Previously, all Eliasson toboggans had front engines. In 1950, a smaller, completely new K10 with a rear-mounted engine was introduced. It had a 6-horsepower Salisbury engine mounted above the track. The driver sat in front and steered small flipper skis using a steering wheel. In 1953, the K12 appeared, an improved version of the K10. They were practically identical, except that a Briggs & Stratton engine with 8 1/4 horsepower replaced the Salisbury unit. The significance of the K12 motor toboggan model was twofold. First, it was the last Eliasson motor toboggan snowmobile in production, and second, it was the snowmobile that later manufacturers used as a benchmark when designing machines with rear-mounted engines. When Polaris opened in 1955, the FWD patents on the motor toboggan were expiring, and production of the K12 was declining. The struggles of the toboggan continued until 1963, when the company sold its rights to the Carter brothers from Waterloo, Ontario. A year later, production of Eliasson snowmobiles was discontinued. At that time, the yellow ski-doos were already rapidly changing the public's perception of snowmobile technology. Now let's go back 50 years. Here is the earliest known photograph of a Ford Model T converted for winter use, taken in 1910. It shows Fred Waters with his creation. Another engineer and enthusiast, Virgil D. White, patented an attachment for converting the Ford Model T into a snowmobile in 1917. White was a Ford dealer in Ossipee, New Hampshire. He built the first snowmobile attachment in 1913, after which he applied for a patent. Over a couple of years, he improved the invention, and in the winter of 1922, he released the attachment to the market, selling the product through Ford dealers. White's kits included everything needed to turn a Model T into a reliable snowmobile, including front skis made of metal and wood and rear drive tracks. The earliest devices sold by White included tracks made of metal brackets connected by strong fabric. Later, White switched to all-metal tracks made of stamped steel shoes connected by chain links. A cast-iron step with the Snowmobile logo replaced the footboards, which were removed to make room for the track system. The Ford Snowmobile was offered with 3 different track widths. These converted Fords became indispensable helpers for people. The biggest fans were rural doctors and mail carriers. Other buyers of the manufactured snowmobiles included utility companies, logging companies, traveling salesmen, firefighters, school bus drivers, taxi drivers, undertakers, grocers, milkmen, truckers, and cranberry producers. When President Calvin Coolidge's father died, on March 18, 1926, a Model T snowmobile led Coolidge's funeral procession through the snowy hills of Vermont. White claimed that the machine was capable of traversing more than 70 centimeters of solid snow at an average speed of 30 kilometers per hour. The conversion kits were quite expensive. Equipment for narrow gauges of 38 and 44 inches cost $395. The standard width kit of 56 inches cost $250. With the skis removed and front wheels installed, the snowmobile turned into a sand vehicle, which handled rough terrain quite well. A number of such machines sold as sandmobiles were used in South Africa, Algeria, Egypt, and the Everglades in Florida. In 1923, White produced only about 70 sets of tracks. By 1925, the rights to manufacture snowmobile attachments had been sold to the Farm Specialty Manufacturing Company from New Goldstein, Wisconsin, which began selling its version of the product in 1926. Later, Farm Specialty Manufacturing Company bought the patents from Snowmobile Company and sent its managers to run the plant in West Ossipee. From 1924 to 1929, Snowmobile Company produced about 3,300 units per year at its plant in West Ossipee and had a branch in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Snowmobile Manufacturing Company closed in 1929. That was the year when the global financial crisis hit. And soon after that, the plant mysteriously burned down. Between 1927 and 1928, Russian engineer Nikolai Kuprianov built 2 snowmobile prototypes with designs similar to modern snowmobiles. 2 steerable skis and 1 track, the driver was positioned above the track in the front. A later model was equipped with a fairing and a windshield. A 5-horsepower Jap engine from a motorcycle was installed inside the track. Kuprianov made the track from 2-wire cables connected by fiber plates, and on the 1928 model from steel. The steering system was designed like that of a car. The track width was 1,020 millimeters. Kuprianov's snowmobile moved quite well over untouched snow, since its specific pressure on the snow did not exceed 50 grams per square centimeter. Such a good result was only possible because Kuprianov's snowmobile was not a converted motorcycle or car, but was built specifically for traveling over snow. Thanks to an absolutely original design, Kuprianov's snowmobiles were lightweight, 131 kilograms for the 1927 machine and 182 kilograms for the 1928 model. Tests showed good cross-country ability and maneuverability for Kuprianov's snowmobiles. Plus, they were quite reliable. They could travel up to 500 kilometers. In the 1920s, the Scientific Automobile Institute, NAMI, actively developed several aerosled models. Besides working with aerosleds, there were also attempts to build a tracked-drive snowmobile. Kuzin was the main ideologist behind designing motorsleds at NAMI. One of the first designs was the NAMI 1, or the NAMI motor sled, model 1928. It was a specially designed machine with a tracked drive and 2 steerable skis. The snowmobile with a 4-seat wooden body was equipped with a 2-cylinder air-cooled engine from the NAMI 1 car with a displacement of 1.12 liters and a power output of 22 horsepower. It seemed that the tests should go smoothly, and in good frost, that's exactly what happened. But when the temperature rose and the snow became wetter, a lot of snow stuck to the wheels and the tracks would come off. The model turned out to be unsuitable. Another design developed at NAMI was the NAMI KAZ motor sled. Their overall layout closely resembled NAMI 1. The main difference was the use of an original track drive engagement system, for which Kuzin filed a patent application on July 22, 1927. NAMI also produced the KARDMI motor sleds, designed by the Karelians. The motor sleds used an Indian motorcycle engine with a power of 7 horsepower. The tracked drive, which included a drive wheel, an idler wheel, and 2 support rollers on one side, was rigidly attached to the body. The motor sleds were steered by braking the tracks. The motor sleds performed well in deep snow but showed low reliability, mainly due to the use of a worn-out second-hand engine. The next name among the great innovators in conquering snowy expanses is Joseph Armand Bombardier. Born in Valcourt, Quebec, Joseph Armand Bombardier tinkered with mechanics from a very young age. At that time in Quebec, the government did not clear snow from secondary roads, so residents of these areas would put their cars into storage for the winter season. And Joseph Armand dreamed of building a machine for traveling over snow. His first creation in 1922 was an aerosled. By the way, the young inventor was 15 years old at the time. Bombardier was born in 1907. The device tests were not fully successful. Joseph Armand's father scolded him and made him remove the propeller to prevent him from accidentally decapitating a sibling. But Bombardier didn't give up on his idea. At 17, Joseph Armand went to Montreal, where he worked as a car mechanic, took courses, and studied literature. He returned to his hometown 2 years later and immediately opened his own workshop. He repaired everything that had anything to do with machinery. Soon the whole area knew Bombardier as an excellent mechanic. The dream of designing a light and fast snowmobile seriously captivated the young man. At that time, there were already several solutions for traveling on snow, but they had obvious drawbacks. The aerosleds invented by the Russian engineer Sergei Nezhdanovsky could only move across open and fairly flat terrain, and the snow tractor created by Elvin Lombard in 1901 weighed about 20 tons. Then, in 1928, Bombardier designed a snowmobile based on the Ford Model T car. He put the vehicle on skis and tracks, but the concept of the motor sleigh was too heavy for the lightweight snowmobile that Joseph Armand had in mind. So he decided to design his own engine. In 1933, his construction was completed, and Bombardier installs this lightweight, for that time, 45-kilogram engine on several prototypes. However, it turned out that the engine overheated quickly, and the idea of using it had to be abandoned. It seemed that Joseph had accepted defeat, but a personal tragedy made him get back to work with renewed determination. In the winter of 1934, Bombardier's 2-year-old son, Ivan, died of peritonitis because he could not be taken to the hospital in time due to the snow-blocked roads of Valcourt. Just a year later, Bombardier invented a fundamentally new cotton-reinforced track and rubber-coated cogwheels to drive such tracks. These inventions made it possible to abandon heavy steel tracks and at the same time improve traction on the road. In 1937, Bombardier received patents for his inventions. In the winter of the same year, he began production of his first commercial snowmobile model, the B7. B stood for Bombardier, and the number 7 indicated the number of passengers. This snowmobile had an enclosed car cabin, could reach speeds of 40 kilometers per hour, and easily crossed half-meter snowdrifts. A total of 7 such vehicles were sold in the first year. The first buyers of the B7 were rural doctors, veterinarians, and funeral homeowners. Bombardier not only constantly improved his snowmobiles, but also actively promoted them. For example, while traveling around the country on his snowmobile, Joseph Armand would always park it in front of the local newspaper office. Snowmobiles were a novelty back then, and press attention was guaranteed. However, Bombardier firmly believed that a good product would sell even without aggressive advertising. Until the end of his life, he repeated, "If a product is useful and well made, customers will be willing to pay for it." And his customers did just that. The number of orders kept growing, and in 1940, Bombardier built a new factory in his hometown with a capacity of 200 machines per year. With the start of World War II, Bombardier's factories began producing armored snowmobiles for the Army. Thus, for the Jupiter landing operation, which aimed to attack German air bases in Norway, Bombardier's company was commissioned to build a fully tracked snowmobile. The company completed the task and at the beginning of 43 built a prototype, which was named Cocky. The vehicle showed impressive results during testing, but it did not go into production because the combined operations headquarters changed the requirements in the spring of 43. Now, the military required a reconnaissance snowmobile with a crew of 2 and bulletproof protection. The vehicle was supposed to have a waterproof body and the ability to overcome slopes of up to 45 degrees. Cocky was modified according to the requirements. The closed cabin was removed, the engine was moved to the back, a partially armored body appeared, and the crew was reduced to 2 people. This vehicle was adopted into service under the name Armored Snowmobile Mark I. A total of 410 units were produced, of which 11 remained in Canada. 396 went to Britain and 3 to the Soviet Union. A total of 1,900 armored snowmobiles were produced during the war years. Annual production increased to 230 vehicles. During the war years, Joseph Armand's business grew stronger, and by 1942 he transformed his private company into the joint stock company L'Auto-Neige Bombardier Limité. And the funds raised from the issuance of shares contributed to the rapid development of the company in the post-war years. So, in 1947, Bombardier began building a new factory where snowmobiles were already being assembled on a conveyor belt. But by 1949, the company's prosperity was put at risk. The blow came from the Quebec provincial government, which decided to clear all roads of snow using modern equipment, including rural roads. By 1950, snowmobile sales fell by over half, but Bombardier persisted. And already at the beginning of 1951, his company began producing small all-terrain snowmobiles, on which the skis could be replaced with wheels, making it possible to drive both on snow and on asphalt. In 1958, Joseph Armand returned to the dream of his youth to create a lightweight snowmobile for one person. Now this task could be solved by using the newly available lightweight engines and the experience that the inventor had accumulated over 25 years of his work. In 1959, Joseph Armand invited his friends to try out the first prototype of a fundamentally new snowmobile. It is snowmobiles of this design that are produced today. Joseph Bombardier's new invention, which was named Ski-Doo, was so well liked by his friends that they rode it for 3 days, almost without stopping. The appearance of the Ski-Doo not only helped improve Bombardier's financial situation, but also gave rise to a new type of winter, sport, and recreation. An interesting fact: the name Ski-Doo is actually a typographical error by the Bombardier Company, which originally intended to announce its first snowmobile as the Ski Dog in a 1959 brochure. Bombardier himself, towards the end of his life, witnessed the growing interest in his creation, the Ski-Doo. By the time of his death in 1964, sales of this snowmobile had reached 10,000 units per year, and by the mid-1970s they had increased tenfold. There's another interesting fact connected with the early Ski-Doo snowmobiles. Nicky Plaisted, an insurance agent from St. Paul, was an avid fan of Bombardier recreational products. In 1967, he wanted to reach the North Pole on a snowmobile. The first attempt failed due to extreme weather conditions, and a year later, he set out again with his team from Canada's Ward Hunt Island. After 1,330 kilometers and 43 days, United States Air Force pilots monitoring them confirmed the team's exact position at the geographic North Pole, and the phrase from the Air Force representative sounded incredibly cool. "Gentlemen, from where you stand, any direction is south." Joseph Armand asked his children to carry on his work, and today, the Bombardier Company, in other words, Bombardier Recreational Products, is one of the most successful engineering companies in Canada. Having talked about Bombardier, it's impossible not to mention one of Bombardier Recreational Products' main competitors. This company is called Polaris. The first Polaris snowmobiles appeared in 1954 in the northern United States state of Minnesota, and their name translates as Pole Star. The founders of the company were 3 talented young men who who were engaged in repairing and small-scale production of agricultural equipment in the town of Roseau, brothers Edgar and Alan Hatton, and their close friend David Johnson. On their first snowmobile, they installed a conveyor belt as the track, a Briggs & Stratton engine, and an old Chevrolet bumper as the skis. The engineers were skeptical about their creation. However, the owner of the lumber mill, Peterson, offered $465 for it. He was satisfied with his purchase, and this encouraged them to focus on producing and improving snowmobiles. This model's debut launched Polaris's successful expansion across the United States and worldwide. To prove that their snowmobiles were not just for fun, Edgar Hetton and three friends set out on a 2,000-kilometer journey across the snowy wilderness of Alaska. They transported nearly half a ton of cargo in -40 temperatures, finishing the trip in 21 days. The friends' determination paid off. The equipment withstood all the tests, and since then, the company Polaris has started mass-producing snowmobiles. Polaris later called their first snowmobiles Snow Traveler. That's right, with a deliberate misspelling in the word snow. They were quite bulky, about 2.5 meters long. The steering wheel was a round one, and the sturdy bodywork was made of steel. It couldn't have been any other way since plastic production was just starting then. The material was considered unserious, unreliable, and lacking in prospects. And Polaris, being a self-respecting company, made things, as they say, to last for ages. The metal windshield supports allowed for the installation of a lightweight folding roof and side panels. By the way, the company uses a similar principle for roofing modern side-by-side ATVs like the Ranger and RZ-R. Interesting fact. In 1958, the United States Air Force military used Polaris snowmobiles just 600 kilometers from the North Pole at a temperature of -48. The snowmobiles handled the harshest climate conditions and the challenges of the route perfectly. In the early 60s, Polaris stopped making agricultural equipment and focused on snowmobiles, already known for reliability and easy maintenance, and other motor vehicles for work and recreation. And by the late 60s, snowmobile exports abroad began. The LA 55 model, which appeared in 1962, took Polaris another step closer to the modern snowmobile. A curved, horn-shaped motorcycle handlebar appeared, the skis shortened, the snowmobile's body was raised, and the driver received a soft backrest instead of a gas tank. The last and most impressive rear-engine model was the Mountaineer KE 24D from 1964, equipped with a 2-cylinder Kohler engine producing 24 horsepower. This sled could fit 3 people, tow up to 2 tons of cargo, and tackle slopes of 45 degrees. The most interesting thing is that this monster already had power steering, a reverse gear, an automatic belt variator, and spring suspensions for the skis and tracks. The total track width was 860 millimeters, which is much more than even the most capable modern snowmobiles. Despite its high price at the time, $3,350, many people wanted to buy the Mountaineer snowmobile. The first front-engine snowmobile from Polaris was the small and rather primitive Comet model from 1964, which marked the beginning of the company's rapid evolution and growth in potential. That same year saw the release of a new version of the Polaris Mustang Sport snowmobiles, which were equipped with new powerful engines and enjoyed great success among vacationers and athletes for the next 3 years. And now let's step away from Polaris for a moment. To understand the situation at that time, we need to provide a bit of historical context. In the 1950s and 1960s, the United States prospered, having gained wealth during World War II and becoming the world's leading economy. There was a ton of money, and even an average, ordinary family could afford, in addition to several cars, all sorts of extra equipment for active leisure, like a motorcycle, a snowmobile, and so on. Winter vehicles became so popular that snowmobile companies sprang up rapidly across the United States and Canada. Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Yamaha, each with branches on the continent, couldn't resist either. Even Harley-Davidson didn't ignore this industry, releasing the only snowmobile model in their history. In fact, the idea of creating a snowmobile originated at American Machine and Foundry, which owned Harley-Davidson at that time. The real boom happened between 1969 and 1972, when there were 64 companies with 420 models on the North American market at the same time, selling over 500,000 units a year. Their power rarely exceeded 35 horsepower, and the engine displacement was 440 cubic centimeters. The ski suspension was very basic, on leaf springs, and the track usually didn't have one, with rare exceptions. The appearance of a snowmobile in the early 70s is unusual for our time, and still looks very much like an ordinary sled. Such intense competition created a great opportunity for numerous experiments. Unusual designs, different numbers of skis and tracks, engine and seat placements, types of engines, various control mechanisms, interesting body shapes, and attempts to set speed and distance records. However, the infamous oil crisis of the mid-70s had other plans for the snowmobile market. Companies vanished in succession. As a result, by the early 80s, only 7 companies remained in the American market. Only the big 4, Polaris, Bombardier, Arctic Cat, and Yamaha, have survived to this day. Together, they produce about 150,000 snowmobiles a year, which is more than twice less than in the golden pre-crisis 70s. By the early 80s, Polaris became one of the recognized leaders of the market. The product lineup already included almost all types of specialized vehicles, not just snowmobiles and ATVs. Later on, Polaris strengthened its leading position. The range of high-quality equipment for sports and recreation became enormous. In the early 2000s, the biggest innovation was replacing 2-stroke engines with cleaner 4-stroke ones. Over the past decade, production snowmobiles with more than 150 horsepower are no longer surprising. Many innovations and added conveniences are now commonplace. Fuel injection, exhaust valve, heated seats and grips, electronic reverse, power steering, long travel suspensions, and more. Looking at such progressive abundance, it's hard to imagine that about 70 years have passed since the first snowmobile-like device appeared. Today, Polaris has perhaps the most extensive market for its products, including the military sector, which is the best proof of the quality and reliability of Polaris equipment. The third giant of the snowmobile industry, Arctic Cat, was founded in 1961 and is located in Thief River Falls. And it was founded by Edgar Hatton. Yes, one of the 3 founders of Polaris. Apparently, the guys had some disagreements, and after leaving Polaris, Edgar didn't give up and continued doing what he was good at. The first Arctic Cat models were built using the classic rear engine layout of that time, with the gas tank serving as the seat back, a car-style steering wheel, and a tall windshield. Notable innovations included omitting body skis and combining front skis with small wheels, which could also replace the skis entirely. It turned out to be a kind of all-terrain vehicle. A similar design was used by Polaris in '65, but it did not receive further development. Just like Polaris, Arctic Cat became one of the largest manufacturers of snowmobiles, jet skis, and ATVs. Over time, there was a continuous upgrade of the technical base, and the entire product lineup was expanded. Today, the market offers a wide variety of Arctic Cat snowmobiles and ATVs, which stand out among other equally renowned brands. Since 1996, the Arctic Cat brand has become the sales leader in the United States, and over time, the popularity and demand for the brand's equipment has only increased. The distributor relationships gradually expanded not only within the United States, but also around the world. As demand rose, production capacities expanded quickly. Let me discuss Yamaha snowmobiles. In the 1960s, Yamaha began looking for new niches to strengthen its position in the United States market. Let me remind you, in the world's most lucrative market. And noticing the explosive growth in the popularity of snowmobiles, they simply couldn't ignore this trend. In 1965, Yamaha released its first snowmobile prototype, the YX-15. Since there isn't that much snow in Japan, snowmobiles are tested mostly on sand. However, the test results show that the prototypes need to be tested specifically in snowy regions. The results have been disappointing so far. The first snow trials in '66 showed several major shortcomings. Finally, after painstaking work, in the fall of '67, the pre-production two-stroke SL 350 model was ready. In the first batch, 300 units of the SL 350 were produced, of which 270 were sent to the North American market. The Japanese public was introduced to the SL 350 for the first time in January '68 at press conferences in Tokyo and Hamamatsu. However, there were still some unresolved technical issues. Yamaha, recognizing the industry's potential, chooses to act independently. Balls, big ones like these. And in the fall of '68, they released the fully finished SL 350 for sale, which becomes the first official snowmobile model from the Japanese brand. After overcoming early challenges, Yamaha found success with the SL, 338 SL, 396, and SS 396 models released in 1969. The next generation of snowmobiles meets the developers' expectations. The company finally gains recognition in the North American market. The company counters its competitors with innovative developments and reliability. Its automatic oil injection system, Autolube, opens a new era of convenience that was previously unavailable to the snowmobile industry. In addition, Yamaha offers an unprecedented 6-month warranty on its products for that time. Consistent wins at the Eagle River World Snowmobile Championship give it a reputation for reliable machines. Throughout the following '80s, Yamaha introduces many innovations and achieves great accomplishments. The Phaser model earns the title of the best-selling snowmobile in the history of the industry, and customers are thrilled with the easy-to-use reverse gear. The famous VMAX 4 showcases something never seen before, a 4-cylinder engine that sets new standards for technical performance on snowy terrain. The new Pro-Action rear suspension guarantees excellent shock absorption on bumps. Yamaha creates a production 500cc engine with the highest power. The decade ends with the release of the first snowmobile, featuring a 3-cylinder engine with 3 carburetors and 3 exhaust pipes merged into one, the SRX 700. Its technical innovation is the exhaust valves operated by a servo mechanism. Without going into Yamaha's full lineup, the company has consistently advanced its snowmobile technology, emphasizing power, reliability, comfort, and environmental friendliness. When talking about modern snowmobile manufacturers, I can't ignore Alpina Snowmobiles, a company founded in 1996 in the town of Vicenza in northern Italy, near the Alps, an area that is one of the world's most advanced centers of engineering and mountain technology. The distinctive feature of Alpina Snowmobiles is that they are huge, powerful utility machines with engines ranging from 1,200 to 1,600 cc and extremely wide dual tracks. Their main purpose is search and rescue operations, expeditions, and work in mountainous terrain. The reputation of Alpina Snowmobiles comes from extensive experience operating in the most challenging conditions. At the moment, Antarctic research institutes from 4 different countries have Alpina Snowmobiles in their fleets, and the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations has purchased a number of Alpina Snowmobiles for search and rescue operations. And at this point in the video, there will be people who will cry out, "What about domestic snowmobile manufacturing?" Don't worry, friends, I saved this topic for last. Remember, in the first half of the video, we talked about upgrading motorcycles with skis and various modules. Such attempts continued in the following years, right up to the present day. Let's talk about some of them. In 1936, specifically by order of the Wehrmacht, a unique BMW Special TR 500 Schneekrat was created based on the BMW R12 model. At that time, the Wehrmacht Army needed light all-terrain vehicles for conducting military operations in European countries, and the military spared no expense, providing orders to various design bureaus. All tracked motorcycles without exception had a complex and therefore impractical design. They turned out to be heavy and unwieldy. The Schneekrat was no different. The prototype of this tracked all-terrain motorcycle was a snow removal machine, built by the same engineer, who used an engine from a BMW R12 and a track from a tank. The track had 2 support rollers underneath and several tension rollers on top. It was driven by the motorcycle's rear drive wheel. As shown in the diagram, all the motorcycle's mechanisms were located inside the track. The designer also provided for the installation of a ski on the motorcycle sidecar wheel. And here is the Swedish tracked motorcycle for snow travel called Larven, which was produced from the 1960s to the 1980s in Östersund. The driver had to use skis for normal movement and control of the vehicle. The design turned out to be compact and light enough to fit in a car. The next machine is from Italy. Alpenscooter, a snowmobile by Pozza di Riquaro, was made in 1975. And this happened thanks to Renata Chaparra, who went on an expedition to Antarctica in order to explain to the Italian government the necessity of Italy joining the Antarctic Treaty, which was signed in Washington on December 1, 1959. This vehicle was originally created for that expedition. Later, the Alpenscooter was supplied to the Alpini, the oldest active mountain infantry corps in the world, and various mountain rescue services. The set of towing equipment includes a front ski, sleds, a stretcher on skis, a track for soil, and a track for ice. Early models had a 200cc engine. Later models used 250cc and 300cc engines. In the 70s, specialists from Husqvarna also tried to adapt motorcycles for snow. The Swedish military officials believe that since 78% of the country's territory is covered by forests and 15% lies north of the Arctic Circle, a highly maneuverable motorcycle would be an excellent way to protect their shared borders with Norway and Finland. In 1973, the Swedish Armed Forces launched a tender for the development of a military multi-purpose motorcycle, in which 2 companies participated, Husqvarna and Hägglund. Both firms had previously supplied motorcycles to the Swedish Army, and Husqvarna won the competition with their design featuring 2 removable side-spring-loaded skis. A contract was signed for the supply of 1,000 Husqvarna motorcycle, 258 motorcycles. The equipment was unique. The skis could attach to both the motorcycle and the rider's legs, and the rear wheel brake control was also on the handlebar. By the way, the 250 cubic centimeter engine was paired with an automatic transmission. Also, judging by this photo, there was an attempt in the late Soviet Union to adapt a heavy motorcycle with a sidecar for traveling on snow. Modern so-called snow bikes have gone much further than the previously shown machines. The appearance of such designs happened quite recently, in the early 2010s, and in 2016 the first Canadian motorcycle, the Yeti Snow Motocross, went into mass production. Modern snow bikes are almost all based on enduro or motocross motorcycles, although no one forbids you from installing a track module and a ski even on a sport bike. This equipment is lightweight, has good suspension travel, and high reliability. Its off-road capability is on par with classic modern snowmobiles. Let's go back in time a bit, to the Soviet Union in the post-war period. Up until the early 60s, there was no development of snowmobiles in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And only by order of the Ministry of Communications of the Soviet Union, in 1964, the NAMY 095 BA Amuritz motor sleigh was developed at NAMY. The motor sleigh was essentially a copy of the first mass-produced Bombardier snowmobile. The Amuritz was equipped with a 6.5 horsepower engine and a variator. It was not produced in series. The first mass-produced motor sleighs, called the Amur 1968 and Laika II 1972, were made by the Khabarovsk Promsvyaz plant. They had an air-cooled D300 engine, with a displacement of 293 cubic centimeters and 6.5 horsepower. This engine was used in gasoline generators. This equipment lagged a whole decade behind the world's snowmobiles. The next attempt at domestic snowmobile manufacturing was the Burin. The prototype was the Canadian snowmobile Ski-Doo Valmont, but it didn't come without some Soviet quirks. The prototype was equipped with a 2-cylinder engine from the Izich Jupiter 3 and a 4-speed gearbox. Mass production began in 1973. The snowmobile already featured a 34 horsepower engine and a variator, which was copied from the Ski-Doo Valmont. The reliability of snowmobiles of this model was proven during a 68-day expedition along a very challenging route from Salikard to the northeasternmost point of Russia, the village of Yulin. They covered 7,794 kilometers, averaging almost 200 kilometers per day. This achievement was entered into the Russian Book of Records. Although Burin snowmobiles are outdated both morally and technically, their production continues, with over 250,000 units made over the years. The Burin even visited the North Pole. In the spring of 1974, the snowmobile was delivered to the drifting Arctic Research Station North Pole 22. But in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they were not only copying foreign models, they also had their own developments. The Poisk snowmobile, introduced in 1980, was developed from scratch with new technologies and inspired by top global models. The engine was a production Privet 22 boat motor, 350cc with 22 horsepower. A new variator was created for the Poisk. They used a single-speed transmission without reverse gear. The advanced feature was the duralumin riveted frame. The ski suspension was telescopic with hydraulic shock absorbers, and the track rested on slides, a unique design for that time. The hydraulic brakes and shock absorbers were developed and manufactured in-house. In December of 1985, machines were assembled. However, the director said that engineers should focus not on new developments, but on solving the main production tasks. Later, the assembled machines were disassembled. The parts were put to use and all the blueprints were destroyed. In 1982, the single-track IKAR snowmobile was designed, and later that year, a twin-track snowmobile with 2 steerable skis and an enclosed cabin was developed. In 1984, a snowmobile for firefighting was designed. In modern times, the factory that in the 70s mastered the production of Burins and was called Rybinsk Mechanical Plant, has been restructured and is now called Russian Mechanics. In the 90s and early 2000s, things were quite bad. Although the snowmobile market in Russia was still far from being saturated, the number of machines produced dropped to the level of the 70s. In 1999, only 5,000 units rolled off the assembly line. However, now, Russkaya Mechanika is a modern manufacturer that produces snowmobiles. Russkaya Mechanika has gone from producing Burin models to developing mass production of all-terrain vehicles and a new family of touring snowmobiles, the Vector 551 and the Frontier 1000. Its products serve rescuers and reindeer herders, border guards, and Arctic researchers, are used for recreation, serve in the units of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, military units, guard borders, and are in demand in the oil and gas industries. Russkaya Mechanika has also mastered the production of all-terrain vehicle S and 6-wheel drive all-terrain vehicles. Russkaya Mechanika vehicles are built for work, recreation, and also excel in competitions. The Rybinsk-Salikard-Yulin expedition, covering 12,000 kilometers, is officially recognized as the longest snowmobile expedition in Russia. Today, the company has 140 dealerships in Russia and operates in 15 countries worldwide. Today, snowmobiles are an indispensable means of transportation for traveling over snow. At the same time, their range of use is extremely wide, from active recreation to expeditions and service in the armies of northern countries. Depending on their use, the machines are divided into utility, touring, and sports models. Nowadays, the focus is on using modern materials and making the designs lighter. as well as on environmental friendliness. How could we go without the trend toward ecology? For example, Taiga Motors from Montreal, Canada, founded in 2015, introduced the first mass-produced electric snowmobile. Taiga TS2 can accelerate from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds with a torque of up to 250 Newton meters. With a weight of 210 kilograms, the Taiga TS2 is one of the lightest in the industry. The snowmobile's range is limited to 100 kilometers. According to the manufacturer, even at temperatures as low as -30. Oh, these electric machines. Motorized sleds are also popular in certain circles, and by the way, they've been produced for more than half a century. Among the new products are electric snowboards. I think it's obvious that with the widespread adoption of snowmobiles back in the 60s, many types of competitions on these machines were born. You can find all sorts of things: endurance races, snowcross, drag racing, freestyle, and so on. I'll mention the most well-known competition, the International 500. It's a major racing event held annually in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. This 500-mile track race has been held since February 1969. Drag racing on snowmobiles is common almost year-round. In the summer and fall, it takes place on grass tracks. The largest event is Haydays in Minnesota. The Iron Dog in Alaska is the longest snowmobile race in the world. Its length is 3,269 kilometers, and it runs from Big Lake to Nome and Fairbanks. The name refers to dog sledding, which has long been popular in Alaska. Since 1997, hundreds of brand snowmobile owners joined the annual Brand Day cross-country race in Russia's Nenets Autonomous Okrug. My friends, my story ends here. Despite the considerable length of this segment, believe me, we've only touched on the snowmobile topic rather superficially. And I don't claim to be 100% accurate. Working alone at every stage of producing this video, I might have missed something or made a mistake. However, I tried to tell you about snowmobiles as simply and interestingly as possible, putting my whole heart into this work. Thank you very much for watching this material. Its fate now depends only on you, on your activity in the form of comments, reposts, views, and so on. This was Crass Moto Channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.